the Elliot Leigh Property Podcast.
Hello and welcome to the Elliot Leigh official podcast. The company, of course, have been at the forefront of property management and private sector leasing for over 20 years. There's nothing these guys don't know about the world of landlords and tenants. This episode is one of a series of programs looking at a variety of different themes from this ever-evolving industry. And to talk us through the issues, one of the founders of Elliot Leigh, Leigh Young, and also joined by Paul Shamplina again, Managing Director at Landlord Action. Welcome to you both. And Leigh, I guess it's worth by starting with a bit of an overview, a landlord's guide, if you like, to looking at this industry that is, as I mentioned, ever-changing, a lot of legislation around at the moment. What is the general guide, if you like, for current and prospective landlords, as well as those that have recently invested?
Absolutely. As you say, it's quite a turbulent time out there for landlords, a lot of uncertainty, a lot of panic. You've got the Renters' Rights Bill coming in, a lot of legislative changes, things that have happened over the years. But we still feel it's a great industry to get into and to remain in. The rents are still quite high at the moment. Interest rates are quite low, I feel, and they are going to come down. And if you structure it in the right way, it's still a very good business to be in. I think a figure came out this week that first quarter of this year, 15% of all properties available to buy on the market are properties that have previously been rented. It's only estimated that about 3% of those will go back into the rental market. So there's still going to be a demand. And I think there's still deals to be had out there. It's just about a matter of structuring it in the right way and sort of knowing what you're doing, being a bit more educated in knowing how you're doing it.
We've said that a lot of times, Paul, haven't we, when we've spoken on this? It is about being on top of your game, just knowing how things work and function, so there's no kind of nasties coming around the corner.
Yeah, I mean, look, landlording in 2025 is completely different. As what Leigh has said, the demand is still really, really high. We have a severe housing shortage. Yes, there's landlords leaving the sector. There are landlords coming back into the sector, or new landlords, a new type of landlord, but there's also some really big corporate institutional investors coming in. So, people need to sleep somewhere. We have a population of 68 million people in this country. So, housing should be and is the number one topic with this government, but obviously successive governments have failed to build. And that's why there's been more added pressure on the private rental sector and on landlords.
Yeah, I was saying, indeed, I think it's just a basic right that everyone should have a safe, warm and secure sort of roof above their heads, really, at an affordable rate.
Indeed. And when you're building a kind of property portfolio, people come in for different reasons, right? Some people have one property, happy with that. It's like a little pension on the side, if you like. Other people are looking at building something more substantial. What is the kind of key areas that you need to be looking at in that world? Do you sit there and say, right, I'm going to plan for 10, or do you start with one and see how it goes?
I think if you're coming in at that level, you could kind of sort of start with one and see how it goes. Well, I think what you've got to remember is I think 80% of landlords out there are accidental landlords.
Yeah.
That have been left properties or sort of can't sell their
property. Or they've
property.
met a partner and they've kept the property.
Perhaps. But, I think to plan, you try it with one. I think forming a company, if you're starting from scratch, do it in a corporate way, form a company to buy your property. Test the model, know your area, work out an area that works for you and that you can manage and you sort of know the demand and the rates, and then try it with one and see how it goes.
But I think also the advice that I always give out in the press, if you are a new landlord coming into the sector, and of course, the word landlord's a dirty word. Unfortunately, it's become a dirty word, which is really, really wrong. Though I say this all the time, we're effectively landlords now are housing providers. Let's be clear about that.
Yeah, I always feel landlord's quite a medieval.
Well, it is. It's land, and I'm the lord, and I own the land. I think the reality is that the biggest headache in renting a property out is the management, and a landlord that's new in the game or quite inexperienced must use an agent or consider using a company, an organisation like Elliot Leigh, where everything is done for you, so you understand what's going on and what it takes of being a landlord. And of course, understand your costs, which is really important as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's a full-time job now. The legislation and the pitfalls, if you don't, and the fines and the sort of financial consequences, if you don't follow those legislations now, are so severe that you really need to know what you're doing. And actually, as you get bigger and you perhaps buy more properties, it becomes easier.
I think one thing that I do say, there is landlord panic. We talked about it recently in your programme, didn't we? I think the reality is landlords do need to stay calm. But landlords are used to loads of legislation being whacked on them. I mean, obviously,
Yeah.
the Renters' Rights Bill is the biggest change, and it's going through committee stage at the moment at the House of Lords. But landlords are used to regulation. But the reality is, for some landlords that have been doing this for a long time, they've had enough. And their
Yeah.
biggest challenge is going to be capital gains tax, isn't it, Lee?
Absolutely, yeah. You've got a lot of changes coming in now, not just legislative, but tax changes that are going to hit landlords. And some of these landlords that are perhaps getting a bit older now and entered the buy-to-lets sort of 20 years ago when it sort of exploded, are now sort of coming to the end and saying, well, I might as well just get out. And that's actually an opportunity for new people, because what we're seeing as well is if you get your finances right, you can get your structure right, there are small portfolios that are for sale. So you may come across a portfolio in an area, a landlord with 4 or 5 properties who's looking to sell, and that might be an opportunity.
This is all about, I suppose, when it comes to the foundations of a property portfolio, this is about risk versus reward. We know that there's more legislation, there's a lot of finances attached to some of that legislation, whether it's documentation, licenses, goodness knows what else, the availability of how much you can get in advance if you need to change the circumstances of the home you've got. So there's a lot more to deal with. And you often hear landlords say, or potential landlords say, is it still worth it? Am I even guaranteed to get my rent every month? Which is really where you guys come in on this, Leigh, because that's a big factor central to what you people do.
Absolutely. So as you know, Ian, what we do, we offer the guaranteed rent scheme. We're getting landlords in big numbers switching to us. There's also a social impact that we help with. But obviously the biggest factor is that we guarantee the rent, which is a consistent monthly income on the same day every month, irrespective of what's going on in the property. You don't have to worry about your voids. We take care of management and maintenance. And of course, the big thing is there's no eviction worries at the end, which again is a big consideration now. I think, again, another report, I think the average time to go through court is 8 months now.
Yeah, I mean, the court system, unfortunately, Ian, is completely broken. And I say this with experience because I issued my first possession claim 34 years ago. Landlord Action is now 25 years. The biggest problem is actually waiting for an eviction date. There's just a massive shortage of bailiffs. And of course, with all of this, what we're seeing at Landlord Action is landlords have been panicking, and because the Section 21 is going to be abolished and getting court orders. And that's a real worry because this government have not invested in the court system, and it's been for years. It's an issue. But with obviously Elliot Leigh, because how the lease is dealt with, it's dealt with differently. Ian. So the landlord has a lease with Elliot Leigh. So Elliot Leigh effectively are their tenant. And then obviously what Elliot Leigh do is they have an agreement with local authorities and they will place people with temporary accommodation. So then there's that obligation. So if a landlord does want the property back, there, what happens is if they had a problem with a tenant, normally what happens is they don't get the rent and then they've got to wait a year to get their property back. And that's a year's rent arrears. You don't get that with Elliot Leigh, do you?
No, absolutely not. So there's no grounds for eviction on rents or anything like that. So if a landlord wanted his property back, he'd just serve the notice and we'd move the tenants or such like. But the good thing on both sides is because we offer the long-term leasing, it's 3 to 5 years, does give that landlord an assurance. And also it gives the tenant, which is another hot potato at the moment, it gives the tenant that assurity. They have that property for 3 to 5 years and they're not moving out.
Yeah, and the thing is, Leigh, that is really important now. I was looking at some of the results of the English Private Landlord Survey. This was a big report, of course, looking at concerns where there are things like tenant arrears, repairs, mortgage payments, the list goes on. So that goes with the territory. You are running a business. You're naturally going to want to run it properly, or good people will want to run it properly. Those concerns are perfectly natural. The last thing you want is the thought that you're not going to get paid your rent.
Well, that's the fear in any business. I mean, it doesn't matter what you do. If you're providing a service and not getting paid, that's pretty much the death knell of any business, isn't it?
Yeah, the argument is there's 3 options. There's a landlord self-managing, which is where we see all the problems, And of course, you've got rent repayment orders coming in the new legislation where if you don't belong to a redress scheme or on the property database, or you've used a wrong, incorrect ground under Section 8, the tenant, and we're going to see loads more increase there, the tenant can instruct a no-win, no-fee solicitor and ask for up to 2 years of their rent back.
Absolutely.
So there's all these different things. So you've got the self-managed landlord, then you've got landlords that use letting agents, and a lot of them do a great job, but there's a lot of poor letting agents, but you pay the letting agent fees, and they're going to be under a lot of challenges with the new legislation and the new changing of terms of tenancy. And then, of course, you've got the option of using companies like Elliot Leigh. But of course, you've got to make sure, and I say this to landlords, I'm at the landlord investment shows, Ian and Kent, and I'll be saying to landlords, if you use a letting agent or you use a guaranteed rent provider, you've really got to take your time and do that real diligence on that company, because once you give the keys over, that landlord has lost control to that letting agent or the guaranteed rent organisation.
It's strange. Sometimes people do more sort of due diligence over buying a sofa than they do in handing the keys over to their most prized possession.
With nothing worse than a rubbish sofa, Lee.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I won't go back there. But as Paul said, I mean, even this year alone, I mean, just something that slipped in under the radar in January. And now, up until January, local authorities had to apply to the housing minister to bring in a selective licence in their area. That's now been devolved to the local authority. So local authorities are bringing in selective licensing, and a landlord doesn't even know if their area is
Can I ask you a question? Because I think this is important. So if someone a landlord instructs you, you cover the EPCs, electrical performance certificates, and you deal with the licensing.
We deal with all that.
Right, because I think that's a real headache, Ian, for a lot of landlords.
Yeah, we advise on licensing if it's applicable in their areas, and we can do the licensing for them if they haven't previously let it or hasn't previously got a license.
And when it comes to an obvious question of things like rent guarantee, what sort of time period is that over, Lee? I mean, are you taking on a contract with a landlord for months, or can it be a matter of years? What's the deal there?
Oh, it's years. It's always years. It's a minimum of 3 years. Yeah, it gives that landlord's a surety that everything's taken care of.
What type of tenants are put in the properties? I think landlords want to know that because they worry about maybe the condition as well.
These are basically tenants who are waiting for an offer of permanent accommodation from the local authority, which, as you know, with the housing crisis we're in, can take anything up to 8-9 years now to get a permanent offer of accommodation. Very often they're families. We deal mostly with families. They could be working. They might be families that have had to move out of previous accommodation for a myriad of reasons, and they've just.
But at least they're not in hotels, which is costing a fortune, isn't it?
They're not in hotels. No.
Yeah.
Well, on the back of that, Paul, I mean, it's fair to say, isn't there? There's been a lot of stories at the moment about people being crammed into hotels and the private sector perhaps taking up the slack of that.
Absolutely, we deal with families that are sort of living in really poor, cramped conditions. You're talking about a whole family living in one hotel room with, their cooking facilities and sort of sharing one bathroom. And when they sort of come to us or present to us and we house them, they're absolutely over the moon to be put into a proper, decent, safe property. And of course, it's much, much more cost effective. Some of these hotels are charging extortionate rates to local authorities. They're trying to get the rates down, but still what we can provide for a property doesn't compare in terms of value and in terms of safe accommodation for the tenants.
I think there is a social conscience, and I think we all have a responsibility, and I think just picking up on what Lee just said, and I know this because I give advice to landlords and tenants as well as other people. There's been a lot of tenants being evicted because landlords are selling, and that must be really stressful. And obviously that's part of the reason they're getting rid of Section 21, because they want to give tenants greater security and understand that there's got to be a ground. But when there's tenants that have been evicted, or there's breakdowns, or there's financial, whatever, it does cause a massive impact on mental health. You've got kids that are taken out of school. So I think the stability is quite important. I mean, did you say 8 or 9 years someone could be, you have tenants that would be?
Yeah, absolutely.
Right.
In certain areas, it's easily an 8 or 9 year wait for a permanent offer of
But how
accommodation.
long people can be, how long are people in your properties?
Again, they could be
Really
there
that
a long
long?
time.
That
Yeah,
long?
we have
Wow.
tenants that have been with us for years.
Oh, wow.
We build
So
relationships.
it's not really temporary, is it?
Temporary is not really temporary
Right,
in that respect.
Right.
But as you say, in terms of mental health, when we sort of deal with families that are coming out of hotels, you've got maybe 3 kids in one room and they're trying to do their homework. They're studying for GCSEs.
That's distressing.
Sort of trying to do their homework on a bed with everyone else in the room. It's tough.
Yeah,
It's tough.
that's really tough.
I said at the beginning of this episode that Elliot Leigh got over 2 decades of experience in this area. It's just worth, for a moment, Lee, if anyone listening to this for the first time doesn't know much about the industry, thinking, hang on a sec, what is the backstory of people that work in this world? You've been there, you are there, you know what being a landlord's like, you know what building a portfolio is like. So you, more than anyone else, do genuinely, from first-hand experience, understand all of the challenges that we've been talking about in this episode.
Indeed. Elliot and I bought our first property property 20 years ago now. Sort of, again, we identified an area. We started in East London. We thought we started with flats. We bought flats, 2-bed properties, because we knew that could accommodate 2 to 3-bed properties, could accommodate families. And again, it became quite apparent key. And even back then, 20 years ago, where legislation and things weren't anything like they are now, management was key. Because if you dealt with problems early and listened to tenants and got things resolved early, it stopped things spiraling. So that's something we learned very early on and is even more prevalent now. But then we slowly built and stuck to an area that we knew, which was sort of the East London area. And then it became quite apparent early on that we wanted to do something with social housing. That was always our aim, because we felt there was a gap there, and indeed we felt there was a gap of decent accommodation for local authorities. And then as things evolved and we created the rent deposit scheme, we knew that there was a...
So did you start off as a letting agent to begin with?
No, we actually bought our first property.
Right.
And knew we wanted to work with local authorities.
Right.
And it started well. And then people were saying to us, could you do that for us?
Right.
So hence we formed and devised this guaranteed rent.
Because you get a lot of people, and I see it, because I do a lot of stuff in the background, Ian, with trading standards and obviously the organisation I'm involved in to try and raise standards across my sector in the private rental sector. You get a lot of people that get into guaranteed rent. They're traditionally been letting agents, and then they move into guaranteed rent. Your story is completely different.
Yeah, we'd always been in property, but we went straight into the social housing, because I think if you've been a letting agent and then you suddenly decide, we're doing this guaranteed rent thing, you don't always have the skill set or the empathy or to actually do it. It's a different skill set, because you're dealing with different people.
What's it like dealing with the local authorities? Obviously, you have to be vetted. You have to go through a lot of hoops. A lot of landlords do direct and have bad experience directly with the local authority. When then obviously now there's universal credit and they don't get direct payment. Yeah. And then there's the rates. I mean, how does the rates work?
So first and foremost, you need to be accredited to work with local authorities. You have to pass tendering processes, ground checks, your finances, and so on and so forth. In terms of rates, we work on a matrix that includes sort of local housing allowance plus an addition for management. So we sort of come up near market rates now. Oh. We're pretty much up there near market rates. But working with local authorities, dare I say, it is a skill set within itself, because you have to know how they work, you have to know what they demand. Different local authorities have different standards, different needs, different demographics. So that's a skill set in itself. So as you say, this is all we do. We don't do...
And you've got a lot of staff here as well.
We have got a lot of staff, got a lot of property inspectors, got a lot of property management people, outreach workers that go out and just check on the tenants. So it's very involved. It's very involved if you're going to do it right.
And fair to say, you've served your apprenticeship quite well over 2 decades. So any doubts in that area are well and truly scuppered.
Well, still learning every day. Always.
Of course. And that would be a terrible thing if we all stopped learning, of course. It's worth just reminding everybody listening, Leigh and Paul, where's the best place to get in touch? There's been some fascinating information on this episode and the previous one we did as well. We'd urge people to check out the last episode too. Where's the best place to go to find out more about Elliot Leigh and getting more information about the kind of thing we've been talking about and the kind of thing that you offer to investors and prospective landlords?
Well, first and foremost, go to the website, elliotlleigh.com. We're also on Instagram, Facebook. There's a plethora of information about us out there. Just type our name in.
And you can get a free quote as well.
And you get a free quote. There's full guides on there to talk landlords through the process as well. So we got some really informative stuff on the website that will talk you through the process if you're just starting, or if indeed you're an established landlord that wishes to look at something different.
And it's really clear as well on your website. I notice you often go to some websites and it's like a minefield of info. You can't work out where you're meant to be going, clicking or looking at. You've set that out really nicely, so it's very easy to understand what's going on.
Yeah, no need to overcomplicate it. It's very simple.
Yeah, indeed. Listen, guys, that's it for this episode. But Leigh, great to speak again.
Indeed. Good to see you again.
And we will speak on the next one. Paul Shamplina, we will speak very soon, sir.
Definitely. Thank you. Enjoyed it a lot.
And that's it for this episode. And of course, we'll be back very soon for the next Elliot Leigh official podcast.